in terms of water quality, I've dealt primarily with sediment control and seeing where sediment comes from. A lot of sediment comes in off the landscape, right? So we have, like, especially in agricultural areas, sediment washes in over the land and goes into the stream, but also sediment comes from places where the river's eroding into the landscape and dirt and soils falling into the water. So sediment has been recognized as the #1 pollutant in waterways because of its effect on wildlife in the river systems, especially a lot of the smaller macroinvertebrate species that tend to feed on, or what we consider like filter feeders, right? So these little things that they filter out whatever's in the water and eat whatever they can filter out of the water, which is usually supposed to be phytoplankton, things like that, so almost microscopic plant material. But when we have a river system that's full of sediment and fine-grained sediment, instead of getting the phytoplankton and the necessary nutrients that they need from that stuff, they're getting bits of sediment, right? So it's not a good thing for animals at that trophic level.
How about biologically, larger animals and stuff? How might it affect them?
Well, in terms of that, then we're talking about trophic level transfer between organisms, because if the smallest of organisms, say a particular type of bug or macroinvertebrate in a stream, if because of sedimentation that thing no longer exists, well, then that's going to have an effect up the food chain, right? So if that little thing doesn't exist anymore, well, then whatever used to eat that is going to have to find a different food source and whatever. So it's maybe going to go somewhere else to try to find it, and so it's just an accumulating effect up the food chain. Really, the sedimentation is an effect of that soil. So
is it like over nutrient?
Sediment is very closely related to what we call eutrophication, or excessive nutrients in waterways, because a lot of nutrients tend to what we say adsorb, or basically cling to sediments. Mm-hmm. So especially in agricultural regions where we put a lot of nutrients and where we put a lot of fertilizers on fields, nitrogen, phosphorus, that kind of thing, those fertilizers attach themselves to the soil particles, and then those soil particles wash off the landscape into the stream, and then that's where we get the eutrophication problems.
And is it eutrophication where there's algae that grows in the water?
Yeah, eutrophication just means
the sunlight from getting to the other plants.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. Yeah, eutrophication is just making a body of water too nutrient rich. So when there's an excess of nutrients, well, then you're going to get algae growing, and when you get algae growing, just what you said, it blocks out the sunlight. It uses up resources that other things that are supposed to be living there need to survive.
Mm-hmm. Have any animal species actually gone extinct because of all of this sedimentation? Or
I couldn't say specifically if that has happened. I don't know for sure in specific species, but I do know it has had a pretty profound effect on a lot of species that are already endangered. Like I said earlier, particularly those species that are filter feeders. Mm-hmm. And one big concern in freshwater aquatic ecology these days is mussel populations. You know what I'm talking about when I talk about mussels?
Yeah. There's a lot of them.
There are. Yeah, there are a lot of mussels, and certain ones, along with macroinvertebrates, like I've already mentioned, but along with certain bugs, we kind of use those as indicator species as to whether the water quality is good or not. In the end, that's what everybody's looking for. Is water quality good? Is water quality bad? Well, we use certain aquatic species to tell us whether it's good or bad. If a certain mussel exists in this one area, well, then we know that that the water quality is probably pretty good, because that particular mussel may be really, really sensitive to sedimentation or to some other chemical being in the water. So if it doesn't exist there, then we know that there may be a problem. Well, plants are actually, well, like animals, there are a lot of plants that can withstand a lot more disturbance than other plants. But in general, plants are pretty hardy, and in some cases, we've actually seen we've actually used plants to help extract bad things from the environment. So places where we may have certain types of metal contamination in the water, they may do what they consider like a bioremediation by bringing in and planting certain types of plants, because the plants will take out whatever's in the water and whatever's in the soil themselves. And a lot of plants are actually can uptake a lot of that bad stuff. So in terms of plants, and I don't know all that much about the plants. I'm more about the actual geology and the animals, more so. But I do know that in the literature, at least, we don't see a lot about water quality impacting plant life. So I will say that. But as far as the Tennessee River goes, that's a big question, right? About because the Tennessee River is a huge river. It's a big watershed, and it's also one of the most heavily managed watersheds in the country.
TVA.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, and TVA does a lot of work to try to keep tabs on the water quality there, because there are a lot of concerned citizens. Anytime you put up dams and you've got nuclear power plants and coal plants and all that kind of stuff, people are concerned.
Yeah.
So the TVA monitors it pretty closely. Now, can I say whether it was good or bad? That depends on what's good for who and what's bad for who. It depends on what you're using the water for. So.